let's do that. Okay.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is the International Behavioral and Neurogenetic Society Fireside Chat. And so the goal of this event from the membership committee was just to have kind of a casual conversation style meeting, specifically targeted towards trainees with a lot of great early career scientists to kind of get some of their input on what the process of transitioning post-PhD is like. So I've got a couple announcements to make. First, the annual meeting of IBANGS is happening in June 3rd through the 6th of this year. It is at Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. I think I've got a link for that. Let me throw that. Yeah, I'll throw that in the chat here for anyone who's interested. I know that abstract submission and some travel award applications are still open until the 22nd of February. So you still have over a week to apply and submit your abstract if you're interested in joining us. There will be a lot of really cool things going on, lots of great symposia, as well as just chances to network and meet, get coffee and food with some really great people. So just a quick agenda for today. I'm just going to introduce the panelists really briefly and ask a couple very short questions to them that we saw pretty much across everyone who registered. And then I'm going to open it up from there. And if you have a question, please just use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. And that way we can keep a nice order and we can keep everyone all set. And so, well, just to try to respect everyone's time, we want to keep it an open conversation. But if you have one question, maybe just wait if you have another one later. And again, to the panelists, please feel free, if it's a specific question to you or if it's a general question, to just provide input wherever you see fit. We have a pretty diverse panel here, so we're excited to hear what everybody has to say. So today's panelists, we have Dr. Emily Petrucelli, who is an associate professor, or assistant professor, sorry, at Southern Illinois University. We have Sandra Sanchez-Roige, I think I got that one right, who is what are you now? Associate professor at UCSD in San Diego. Spencer Huggett, who is a principal scientist at Nido Biosciences, and he's also a consultant at Emory University. And then Nate Rustay, who has a lot of industry experience and is currently the director of medical communication at Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So the first question that we have for the panel, just to get everyone familiar with your backgrounds, could we go through the panel and just you tell us about your PhD, your background, and kind of what you studied and what you work on now? Maybe Emily, if we want to start with you, that would be great.
Great. Well, first off, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I'm glad to share with everybody who loves science. And thank you, Spencer, for inviting all of us to do this panel. As far as my background goes, I actually am now officially tenured according to, well, as soon as the paperwork goes through, as an associate. So yay. Yeah. Thanks, Sandra. And so, yeah, path as my PhD, I did my PhD at the University of Iowa, and I studied Drosophila neurogenetics. And then I did my postdoc at Brown University in Drosophila neurogenetics, and I stuck to the Drosophila neurogenetics here at Southern Illinois University because it's a great model for undergrads to get their hands on science. Also here as a professor, I teach genetics to our sophomore level students, and also upper level bioinformatics and molecular biology.
Great, thank you. Sandra.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I have been chasing the sea. I was born in Barcelona and graduated there. Then I went away from the sun to England and I did my PhD at the University of Sussex. And then because I missed the sun, I am now in San Diego, where I did my postdoc, and then I transitioned to assistant professor and then associate professor, which is my current position. I study psychiatric genetics, but it has not been this way always. I guess it's a case of you can mix and match your disciplines. I started with psychology, then neuroscience, and it is then during my postdoc that I wanted to incorporate genetics in my skill set. So I guess in a nutshell, that's me.
Great, thank you so much. Nate, you want to go next?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me as a part of this panel. Actually, I just got a message from Jackie Crawley, who was my postdoc mentor, so I'll get to that in a second. I'm Nate Rustay. I also got my PhD in behavioral neuroscience from Oregon Health and Science University, where I studied in John Crabb's lab, studying mouse genetic models of alcohol tolerance. I used both inbred strains and selected lines of mice to look at motor incoordination and tolerance to the effects of alcohol there. After that, I did a postdoc at the NIMH with Jackie Crawley. So she was a great mentor for me there, where I shifted my focus from alcohol and drug abuse to learning and memory, and focusing specifically on Alzheimer's disease models. So did 2.5 years in Jackie's lab there. As a part of that was a shift to a brand new building. And so setting up a lot of the assays in the new building was a part of my responsibilities there. But after leaving NIMH, I got a job in industry. So that's where I made the switch over to industry and was a bench scientist at Abbott Laboratories in Chicago, studying neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's disease, and also neuropsychiatry. So models of schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease, anxiety, depression. And I did that for 3 or 4 years at Abbott, moved into a translational neuroscience lab there, and then kind of made a significant career shift and moved out of the lab setting and became a medical writer within the medical writing group at Abbott, supporting our neuroscience compounds, but really supporting the communication of the clinical trials that were being done in our neuroscience portfolio at Abbott. So I've been doing that now for 10 years in the medical communications realm, and I wanted to say, I think you're being a bit generous, including me in the early scientist panel here. I feel like I've been doing this a long time now. I'm kind of the old man of the group, but you know, I made a shift into medical communications, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And I think that's one of the nice things about getting the training and the scientific background. You don't always have to do science. You can be doing the direct science. You can be on the side of evaluating and communicating the science too. And that's what I do now. And I'm happy to talk more about that as we go.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to communicate as well to the attendees that Lisa Goldberg, unfortunately, is sick, so she's not able to be on the panel today, but hopefully she gets better soon. And we still have a good sized panel here. So thank you, Nate. Well, we appreciate your experience, and hopefully you can bring something else to the table too with having a lot more of that time in industry. Spencer, if you want to finish this off.
Yeah, most definitely. And thanks again for the invitation here. It's a pleasure. So I'm Spencer Huggett. My background is in mostly data science and comp bio. I did my PhD at SIEU Boulder at the Institute of Behavioral Genetics. I got a degree in psych and neuro, but mostly there I did a lot of twin modeling. I did some statistical genetic stuff, all focused on addiction, and trying to figure out the genetic and molecular correlates of addiction and drug use. Then I did a postdoc at Emory for a couple years. That was mostly focusing on bioinformatics still, with an emphasis on substance use. And then the last few years, I transitioned into an industry role, mostly as a scientist, focusing kind of like Nate, transitioning from psychiatry to dementia. So we focused on rare genetic forms of dementia and making medicines for them. And yeah, now I'm in Boston after moving from Emory.
Great, thank you all so much. So just the one question that really kind of resonated across a lot of the people when they registered was, what factors influenced your decision to pursue either academia or industry? And when in your career did you make that choice? So if we want to go in the same order for that one, and then after that, we'll open up the floor to the attendees. Emily, if you want to start.
Sure. So I'm a first generation college student, let alone a PhD. So I didn't know anything else existed except medical school after undergrad. So during my medical school interviews was when I found out that I don't care about people, but I care about their diseases. So I learned about PhD a little circumtitiously, but I did take 2 years off to become a research assistant and actually see what that lifestyle was like in a lab. And so that's when I guess I made the decision that a PhD life was for me. I liked the aspect that I could teach or do research or find a job eventually doing both. And so I basically stayed then in the field of flies for that reason, trying to remember that I could teach long term. And then as far as staying in academia too, instead of industry, I was inspired during school. So not that I have the cliche, I want to inspire students, because I really don't know what inspires them anymore. But I do hope to spark interest and excitement in pushing the field forward in whatever way that is. So I like my weird route to stay in science and academia, and hopefully students can relate and find their own path.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Sandra.
I wish I could say that I had it all mapped up and I went from A to B in a chronological perfect order, but I think it's unlikely this way. It mostly reflects a series of chance events, if you will. I almost feel I am in science by accident because I opened literally the wrong door. I remember when I was an undergraduate student, I opened the door to a meeting where they were discussing science. And back then, I had no idea that one could be a scientist in this way. I was very naive. And I was so enamored that I decided that I wanted to be part of that world. And I guess that I have to stop there because my my next series of events have been very uneventful, and like Nate, the diversity in the portfolio, it's so fun. But I just knew that I wanted to do this if I could forever, to continue coming up with questions and answer them with various tools, being part of this community and have all the freedom to choose and pick the question that I wanted. And so that's why I stayed in academia for my postdoc, and I knew quite strongly that this was a path that I wanted to take on. However, more recently now, perhaps I'm taking the best of the two worlds, because one thing that I value tremendously is the ability to partner with industry. So even though I'm not part of industry, I love having partnerships with industries, because it allows us to do things that in a scientific environment we cannot do necessarily, such as, for example, collecting very large cohorts of individuals. And so, yeah, I guess I have a little bit of involvement in industry, but in a different way to Spencer and Nate.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Nate. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. I mean, to me, it was more just a feeling I had that as going through even undergrad and graduate school, I didn't think I wanted to go kind of the professor academia route. I thought that it sounded like a pretty exciting way to go on the industry side and really be, part of these organizations that really do have that end goal of developing new medicines that can be used. It's a very tangible thing, right? This idea of working on something that can eventually be used in patients. And I know that was just something that was attractive to me, which is one of the reasons why I kind of made the shift from drug and alcohol abuse that I knew in graduate school to kind of broader learning and memory types of things that I thought would be more applicable in the pharma world. At the time, I feel like the pharma side had really kind of moved away from targeting drug and alcohol abuse. It wasn't as much of a hot topic. There was less work going on there on the pharma side, whereas Alzheimer's disease was a huge thing that was being studied by everybody and still is. To me, it was, it was just a sense that I felt like the industry side was more where I wanted to go. But to be completely honest, I had no idea what it was like working in industry up to that point. And it was a little bit of a learning curve. My first job in industry was very much like being a postdoc, where it was pretty much in the lab every day, designing studies, analyzing data, reporting back to the group about what it was that we found. But it's definitely, it's got a different feel to it than the typical kind of academic lab setting does too. But I'm happy. I've been in industry now for 18 years, and it's I don't have a desire to leave. Done different roles, which is another opportunity I think that presents itself within the industry setting as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Spencer.
So I originally started with wanting to be a clinician. So I actually applied to like clinical psychology programs, and the only one I got into was like 150 grand for tuition. So I did not do that, and I went more the research route. And then I, got trained in some of these data science skills, and I really love the research of academia, and learned to love, doing data science and coding stuff. But, it kind of all changed, when I was a postdoc. And, I was like considering doing the professor and continuing the research that I really love doing. And then we had a meeting at Nido on like substance use. And there's this one guy whose name's what I called him Hard Knocks Dr. Phil. He was the guy helping the patients. And like we all presented like, some really cool research. And I asked him, I was like, how useful is this stuff to what you're doing right now? And he pretty much said like, not at all. And I didn't really like that too much, because I wanted to have a clinical impact. And I didn't see, the research that I was doing was going to like urgently fill that gap. So I switched to industry, and then I started studying something that, wasn't as close to heart, but definitely was rapidly developing. And, I met some of these patients with the disease, and they were just so enthusiastic that somebody was trying to, find a medicine to help. And that really, made the decision for me to move into into an industry space where, they aggressively, especially at startups, kind of attack these diseases that, have unmet clinical needs. But similar to Sandra, I kind of like having the best of both worlds. So I didn't want to, leave this academic research that I loved behind. So I still, do consulting, and I still really love the community and focus on substance use. So I kind of get the best and worst of both worlds, if you will. But that was kind of the narrative arc in which, I made the decision to make the leap into industry.
Great. Yeah, thank you all. Lots of different paths and a lot of different ways you can end up at these different places, but all unique stories. And so I appreciate you all sharing those. And so at this point, I think we're just going to open it up to the attendees. This is for everybody who's here. If you have any questions to a specific panelist or just a general question that you've been thinking about, please don't be shy. Raise your hand in Zoom, or you can put it in the chat. We can read it out. What are people interested in hearing about?
Hi, can I ask a quick question? Nate, I have a question for you specifically. You mentioned that working in a lab in industry, like wet lab based, had a different feel. you elaborate a little bit more about what you meant by that?
Yeah, maybe that wasn't really fair. I think I was a little surprised. Well, I guess a couple of things, some good and maybe some not so good. The good, I think, was, coming in, and I think somebody else already mentioned, having a lot of resource. Generally speaking, at least at the company that I started out in, it was a well-resourced lab. So you needed something, you could figure out a way to get it. And that was really good. I think the other thing that I really liked about it was that if you were working on a given compound or a given target, there was someone in the company, and likely a few doors down, who knew about it, who knew whatever question you had about it, whether it was target engagement or toxicity or, anything along those lines. There's somebody else who knows that. And so when, I always think about when I was writing papers as an undergraduate, and you get to the discussion part and you say, well, these results could be due to X, Y, or Z. And I felt like when I got into industry, those questions weren't there anymore, because I could go talk to someone and say, oh yeah, we did this receptor binding and we know exactly where it hits, and we know where these are all expressed. They're all expressed here and there. So that I felt like was this amazing resources locally. You had everybody around that had all this expertise on what it is that you were working on. The downside of it, I think, I don't want to say that the corporate culture is necessarily a bad thing, but there's a lot of meetings. We go to a lot of meetings. We have a lot of reports. We have a lot of, kind of the part of it that is less fun to me, I guess. The idea of sometimes you get stuck doing things that you just have to do because this is what your boss and your boss's boss and your boss's boss's boss tells you that needs to get done. So there's a little bit of that. You give up some of that freedom to kind of really look into everything that you want to do, but there's a reason for that. The reason for that is because they're looking to do those things that are going to be the most impactful and the most meaningful. And if this project that you're interested in, or if this little, side trip that you want to take to explore this interesting thing that kind of came up, if that's really not going to move the needle for the project that you're working on, and it's not going to help them make more decisions to push this forward, then you're probably not going to get support to do that. Whereas you may have more of that freedom just kind of in the academic setting to be like, hey, this was a kind of a cool little thing that I saw over here. Let's look into that a little bit more. So I think, you give up, and I'm sure nobody's surprised by this. I mean, that's kind of one of the main things that I always heard thinking about going into industry or academia. Well, you're told what to research. I don't think that's true. I think they look for people who can think through the science and can look at where it's going to be the more interesting paths to go. But there still is that you can't do whatever you want, because obviously you need to be dedicating your time to the things that are going to be the most meaningful to help the company make decisions and move things forward. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
We have another question in the chat from Laura for Nate as well. Do you have any advice on how to get started in the medcoms field, especially with someone with no other medcoms experience except an MD, PhD?
Yeah. So I can tell you a little bit about my story. I don't want to take up all the time though, because I know that there are a lot of other people on the panel that probably have things to say. But I found at one point in my lab work, I was becoming the person that our particular group that I was working in at the time came to do a lot of editing and writing and responding to reviewer comments and all that fun stuff that always happens with manuscript preparation. And I kind of liked that side of it. And I just happened to look within the company itself and found out that we had a medical writing group. I had no idea that was even a thing. Like we had internal medical writers that helped develop publications, abstracts, posters, all those things on our clinical work within the company. And so as I started looking into it too, I talked to the people in that group and I said, how do I make this transition? What is it that you're looking for? What can I do to kind of explore this more or find out if this is something that I'm interested in? And they recommended me looking into the American Medical Writers Association, the AMWA. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's a really good resource to better understand, you know, kind of what the guidelines are, how people do this, what the key things are that people think about. The other one that's really more of an industry focused organization that's focused on medical publishing and medical communications is ISMAP, ISMPP, the International Society of Medical Publishing Professionals. It's primarily an industry-based organization, but talk a lot about how medical communications, medical publications work within the industry setting. That, I guess those would be my two recommendations. Kind of check those out, look more into what it is that is seen as important. They have a lot of resources in there for, especially AMWA, a lot of resources in there for training and for and if not necessarily recruiting, but helping new writers out. Ultimately, I would say if you like writing, if you like the scientific writing and the going through the work that it takes to publish papers, it's not a bad route to go. But you need to like that part because it's most of what you do. But yeah, so hopefully that's helpful. If you have, I'm happy to follow up after the call too if you have specific questions.
Great, thanks. It looks like we had another follow-up to Laura's question about just when you're already in industry, how do you gain experience and transition to these other positions? Are there opportunities for kind of on-the-job training? Do you go in, or do you need to develop these skills kind of elsewhere? Or does that depend on the company? If anyone else has thoughts on that.
I can answer, but I'm happy to let other people answer.
Go for it, please.
I'm sure it's dependent company to company. I'm sure it differs. The other thing that I would say is I still think that there are some companies out there that have postdoc programs. That was something that I looked into as when I was a postdoc itself, looking into, I think it was maybe Eli Lilly at the time had a postdoc program. So that's another thing to look into to kind of get a sense, kind of getting your foot into industry on that side of things. But then once you're within the industry, I think it's a combination of things. Abbott, when we were there, actually had what they called a visiting scientist program that you could apply for and say, look, I'm interested in learning more about this side of the business, or I'm interested in learning more about a particular technique or something like that. I think the intent was for that to be kind of more within science, kind of going one way versus another. But my wife actually did that and did a role within regulatory affairs. So she moved out of the bench. She was a bench scientist, got a job as a visiting scientist in regulatory affairs and learned all about, interactions with the FDA and what the company has to do to build a package to send to the FDA, what they're going to look for and everything else. So I think that there are a lot of those opportunities within certain companies to be able to explore in that avenue. Otherwise, sometimes it's just reaching out to people in other functions and say, hey, what do you do? How did you get here? What advice do you have? Checking the job board, seeing what other jobs are available, maybe talking to the hiring manager and saying, this sounds interesting to me. What is it that you do and how could I learn more about this? And I think that that's probably true outside of industry too, just to reach out, make connections, figure out what people do, how they like their jobs, and how they got to where they are.
Thank you, Nate. Great. We got some questions in the chat, just general questions for all the panelists. We may be able to combine these. So one is, what specific skills from your PhD or postdoc were most valuable to securing your current position? And then maybe if we want to combo that with Allie's question, what's something that you would wish you had known before joining your current group? Someone, Emily, you're laughing. Do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'd like to point out what I was laughing about was what I wish I would have known is also what I wish all my students would know, which is coding. Bioinformatics could not come early enough. If you have a child, I will probably try to write a genetic coding book for little kids to buy and read to them at night. So yeah, coding is key. any discipline for whatever purpose it's necessary. And then as far as the general thing that got me my position, I'd say, is a lot about fit. So not feeling like, there's a lot of people applying for my position, but understanding the nature of my school, for instance, is a kind of middle sized. I have 50% research, 50% teaching load, but kind of understanding what the identity of the school and the are is really key in knowing that the position will be a good fit for you and what you bring to the table as a department to like how you fit with the rest of the community. So that's like one kind of general thing. And I knew a lot about the diversity of academia because I went to a small private school for undergrad, and then I did a University of Iowa large public school, and then Brown is an Ivy League political hotbed. So I'm right in the middle now for size of school and influence.
Thank you. Other panelists, Sandra.
Yeah, I'm happy to join this discussion. I think one of the things that really contributed to where I am is really nurturing strong relationships with everyone that you interact with, because it is extremely important to have a sponsor, not only a mentor, which is critical, but to have a sponsor. And to be able to have a sponsor that will vouch for you, which really is critical, especially when you begin and you doubt yourself and you need somebody by your ear saying, no, you've got this. You really need to nurture a relationship that is meaningful. So think of it in two ways. When you connect with a mentor, it's not only him giving or her giving you skills, but you're also giving back. And so that's something very special that has helped me to be here today. And something that I wish I knew really took me by surprise. When you're a PI, you have to lead a group and manage people. And that is a skill that is incredibly challenging because when you're a postdoc, you have your own ecosystem. But then the minute you begin moving forward, you start branching out, which is fascinating because then you can accomplish a lot more projects and more things. But at the same time, managing this it's a struggle. It is extremely rewarding because that means also that you get to work with many different people and talented students, postdoc, and other colleagues. But how to juggle it all has been a struggle that I don't think I have figured out yet. So I guess I wish still I knew the answer to that. If any of the other panelists have the answer to that question, I would be interested to hear.
Thanks, Sandra. Nate.
What I wish I would have known. Yeah, it's a tough one, and it's funny. This is probably going to sound really dumb, but before joining industry, I didn't really understand how scientific it was. Like how many really good scientists, really smart people there were in the group that I started in. I felt it was a bit intimidating at first. Like people asked really good questions, and they asked really hard questions about what it is that you did and why you were doing it. And but again, I think that gets back to my point before of like they need to do those questions because we need to make sure that we're spending our resources and spending our time doing the things that are going to be the most impactful. And so obviously I had great training, great education with really strong, smart scientists in my development, in my scientific development. And I guess I wasn't expecting that same level of oversight when I started in industry. And it was great. It was really a great group of really smart scientists with really strong backgrounds. And I think it would have been good for me to have a better understanding of that before I joined, to know a bit more of what to expect. But it was there was no letdown in the science when I moved to industry, for sure.
Spencer, what do you think was most important in securing your position? And then what was a surprise to you?
Yeah, this is a great question. Well, I'd say the most important thing to know before getting a new job is just a blend of hard and soft skills. for whatever the position may be. So kind of like what Emily was saying about coding, that was really important for me. And some of the places that interview you like look at you code and stuff, so you have to be competent. But coding and all these hard skills of whatever it is that you're applying for only go so far. You have to be able to articulate this effectively to somebody who has no idea what you're doing. So this like communication and the relationships, like Sandra was saying, are like paramount, because you could be doing the coolest thing ever, but if you can't like articulate that effectively, it really doesn't mean much. So I would say it's really important to have both of the hard and the soft skills. And like Sandra was saying, the relationships are key. And to get a job in just pretty much anywhere, 2/3 of them are based off of networking and somebody So, and it's tough coming from academia, because if you want to make a jump into a different space, it's like you don't really know too many people there. So it becomes like a little bit of a gap that you have to navigate through. And there's plenty of ways to get around that, but it's just another challenge in order to transition into something else. And what was the second? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nate.
I was just going to say, I would echo that entirely, especially about the networking. Make as many connections as you can, and good personal and scientific, because I think that will go a long way. I totally agree with you that it really helps to know people along the way. I think I guess at least 2 of the jobs that I've had postdoc have been because I knew people in the space, or I knew people at a company, and I was able to get information from them on the life and what the company was like, the culture and everything else. And so yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. Sorry, just wanted to jump in there.
Great, thank you guys. Yeah, that sounds lots going on there. It seems like it's really important, networking, connections, and as you mentioned, Spencer, just a blend of all of these different hard and soft skills. We have another question in the chat about, do you need a postdoc to have a scientific position in industry? And if you don't do a postdoc, what should you do during your PhD to kind of get ready for these industry positions? Maybe Spencer or Nate for that one.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that, since I did a postdoc and then jumped to industry. I wouldn't say it doesn't really hurt to have a postdoc. But most people, if you're looking for an industry job, most people want industry experience. So like the sooner you get industry experience, if that's what you want, the better. And like in the job descriptions of most places, they're just talking about number of years that you've worked post-graduation. So it could be as a postdoc, but some people or some job descriptions will be like, it does require some sort of industry experience. They want, to see you doing something that is already directly applicable to them. And that's something you're going to have to, try to figure out for any particular job that you're looking for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I did a postdoc too, and I think that one of the reasons I did that was to really get a better understanding of what I thought would make me more marketable in industry, right? So I wanted to move into something that was a hot topic in neuro research and industry, which is Alzheimer's disease, right? So I used that opportunity to make sure that I understood to the best that I could, what those things, what those key questions are, and learn more about the disease and the types of things that were going on from a research perspective there. I don't think it's absolutely essential. If you are working in a graduate lab that is doing something directly applicable to where a lot of companies are spending time, I think it's easier then to make that jump. I would look for those opportunities, though. I think Sandra, you were mentioning earlier about this potential collaboration between academia and industry. If you know of people within your academic institute that are collaborating with industry, again, reach out, try to make those connections, try to get a conversation with those industry people to see if there is something that you can be doing to make yourself more marketable or more appealing. But I agree, it's the constant challenge, right? Of if you want to make a move into industry, how do you first get that industry experience? And it's not always easy, but you know, any way that you can learn more about the business, kind of what are the key aspects of what you'd be doing in that role so that you can at least address it, even if you don't have industry experience, I think you can hopefully have a leg up on some of the other competition.
And
The other thing I would say, just real quickly, I think it is important if you do decide to do a postdoc, don't get stuck like as a lifelong postdoc. I do think it is good to finally make that jump into actually having a job. Because I think the longer you delay it, you know, the harder it is to make that jump. Sorry, Sandra.
Oh, no, that's beautiful. I would like to add that it's nice to also have an open channel of communication with your current supervisor, for example, because I know several people in my group that, well, initially they were interested in industry and now they pivot back to academia, but they were really open to the fact of I want to move into industry. And because I knew that, then I can also facilitate those connections. And I can say, well, maybe you should be working on this project that may be more appealing to that company that you're interested in. And so if you keep that a secret and you don't let your mentor know, they cannot help you get to that point. So again, like having an open channel of communication would be good.
Thank you. A lot of great info there. We have another question in the chat for Sandra and Emily. Just after your PhD, how did you move into the world of teaching and professorship? And what would you recommend to work on during your PhD or after your PhD in order to move in that direction? Emily, if you want to start.
Yeah, so so Carla, many of you probably know Carla Count. She was my postdoc advisor. I told her from the start that I was still angling towards academia afterwards, but I didn't have a timeline in mind. So I was very upfront about my goals and that they could change over time, but I really didn't want to do 2 postdocs. I just thought I wanted the job at some point, especially with my family not understanding science. They still thought I had summers off. They still do, actually. But anyway, I really just started to treat job applications to areas in the Midwest, which is where I'm from. Because I was on the East Coast, I knew I missed that location. And so I also know I'll have to take care of my parents at some point. So I knew that when those job openings came available, that I should jump on them, even if it was for practice, to either get my deadline, materials in, or even to go give a talk and then not get asked to come for the job. I just so happened to get lucky and have a really nice fit with my Southern Illinois University here. So I only ended up doing years in my postdoc, which is not Carla's goal for me. She wanted me to stay much longer. So I really just reached out early because I knew that I had a particular fit in mind. And so she's always, though, been supportive of me to in my position now and still is a mentor to me. So, yeah.
I guess I will speak to the second part of that question. What would I recommend to work on? It is critical when you see an application, what makes it stand out, what makes it strong, is having a clear storyline, a clear why. What are you researching? What makes you unique, and make that shine through in your applications. But then, and so the research that you do also should be consistent with that. But then also try to seek out as many opportunities as you can. Try to apply to this travel award from IBANGS, right? Try to get as many grants as trainee as you can. Try to really beef up your CV so that when you're ready to move on into a professorship, your CV looks very, very strong. So that would be my best advice is, but you asked that question, which means that you're probably a planner. So you're doing things the right way, but just really try to seek out ways and opportunities to improve your CV.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a lot of great advice. Alp had a question about what channels did you use when looking for a job after your PhD? Do you use LinkedIn or other networking? What's the best way to go about finding a job? And I think that one's for everyone. If anyone wants to unmute and just go for it.
I'll go for it this time because mine was was really wishful thinking. It's like I did not go conventional ways. I thought of who do I want to work with, and then I reached out. So in a way, like, don't wait as well for a potential job opportunity. But if you already know of specific groups that you'd like to work with, why don't just sending an email and asking if there's an opening? Like in my case, that's what I did. And 30 minutes later, I got a positive response, which really was not what I was expecting. But not to mean that everything will work out nicely as this, but why not dream and ask and then see if the answer is yes?
I would agree with that, to like reach out to people, whether it's on LinkedIn or email or whatever. It's probably going to be a little different based off of whether you choose the academic versus industry path. But you know, LinkedIn is a great resource, Indeed, things like that. There's also a podcast on Spotify I recently became aware of called Career Contessa, which is loaded with really good tips and tricks to, you know, navigate getting a job in this kind of new space, where like recruiters are using AI to help, you know, search for resumes and keywords and things like that. So I mean, there's a lot of good tools and resources out there to help you kind of land a job and kind of, I guess, renegotiate your resume or translate it to a specific position that you're interested in. But I think, you know, since the majority of jobs get, you know, are through networking, I think the more of a network that you have, the better. And it really couldn't hurt much to just reach out, even if it's like a smile and dial over, you know, an email or whatever on LinkedIn. But I would say the earlier you do it, the better.
Emily and Nate. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
I was just gonna say I would agree with that. It's probably gonna date me even more. I think that when I started looking for jobs, I don't even know if LinkedIn was really very, very strong. So that's very sad. But yeah, LinkedIn is great. The other thing, if you are interested, again, in industry, company websites often post all of their jobs too. So and usually they're pretty easy for searching for given topics. So if you know if there are companies that are in an area that you want to stay in scientifically, that's always a good resource to have too. But definitely LinkedIn. Yeah, and just keep talking to people. Keep talking to people you know, because they often, you know, growing your network that way is a good way to do it too. And your mentors, in all likelihood, will have a lot of good contacts. I know mine did. I was lucky, certainly as a postdoc too. Jackie, who's in the audience here too. She knew a lot of people. She worked with a lot of people in industry, and so you know, was able to guide me to a certain extent about, you know, who she's worked with in the past and be able to help with some of those outreach efforts as well.
Thank you so much, Emily. Did you have anything to add about the job search?
So I guess we have a master's program here, so I get a lot of questions from my students about where they should go to search. And I think one of the big sources that we have in our area, because we have a lot of startups and industry, but also some smaller schools and larger schools, actually. So we have a lot in the area, and starting up a conversation with either an elevator pitch really quick, just to understand, you know, where you would fit in the, you know, realm of possibilities that are available to people. And then alumni events are very common here, at least. And so I would probably reach out to a lot of people and just say, hey, like, you know, like a Hawkeye too. And that means we might know some people. And what have you heard about on the job realm? So yeah, that would just say the alumni and opportunities just in the area, even if they're short term.
Great, thank you. We had a question for Sandra and Emily in the chat from Jake. Do you have tips for navigating the departure from your postdoctoral advisor? And what are the resources that made your transition successful? Or what did you not have that maybe made that transition more challenging? What should you do in that transition state? Sandra, if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question. It is sad because you nurture this relationship with your postdoctoral mentor, but then you have to show independence. So in a way, you have to show some sort of departure. But I say it's sad because a natural, good relationship would mean that you continue collaborating with your mentor. So it is tricky to navigate. My personal take on this, I had a very clear, distinct line of research. And so if you can begin to find your niche that is completely independent from your postdoctoral mentor, that would facilitate this transition. Or if maybe during your PhD, there was something that is really not directly related to the work of your mentor. And if there's not such a thing, maybe you can sit down with your current mentor and think, how would that path look like? And what could you take on from the work that you are doing? And your postdoctoral mentor surely will agree that that's the next step. And you're right in thinking so, because you do need to show that when you reach the professorship stage, you need to show clear independence. So maybe a good conversation, if you cannot identify already uniqueness in your research that you could take with you, a conversation would benefit. What do you think, Emily?
So I can also recommend getting a grant, K99R00, the kangaroo grant. So that's actually helped transition. But I knew a lot of postdocs who were doing that. As far as the mentorship relation, I think it's just being clear and open about goals, because like Carla always wanted me to be happy. So she knew that whatever is going to make me happy, she'd support. As far as materials go, though, I also recommend, for teaching side, I had to give an example lecture on material that I had to create. So I didn't have that, during my postdoc, but Carla was open to helping me look over what would fit for her courses. She was doing a learning and memory course. And so it was a nice transition to talk about materials that were for the application for my different jobs I was applying to. My two very specific assistant professor jobs that I applied to and got offers for both. So Carla also had to help me identify which one I should take. She was still leaning towards me not taking it either. But yeah, I did take one.
Okay.
There's not enough master.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna, Mackenzie, I believe you were unmuted. There you go. Great. Thanks. If you have a question, please feel free. We have another question from Olivia in the chat. Do you think there's a difference in, I guess, work-life balance in industry versus academia? And maybe if any of you are familiar with maybe positions that kind of hit at both ends of the spectrum when people are looking for something. So how is work-life balance? Spencer, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure thing. And I mean, I can only speak to my one experience here, so please take this with a full shaker of salt. But I would say there's differences for sure. And as Nate was alluding to earlier, there's just tons of meetings all the time. But I would say that in industry, one of the biggest things that I noticed as a kind of jarring transition is, at least in startup land, was really aggressive turnarounds. You get data, you analyze it, you report it in a day or two, kind of thing. It's fast. But so that can get in the way of having, I don't know, a better work-life balance. I would say mine was better in academia, but yeah, it's hard to say. Because it really depends on your particular position. And I think ultimately it really depends who your boss is too, because I had a few bosses, and then my work-life balance kind of tracked with like, how great my boss was. So I would just really say find a good team, good boss, like wherever you go, and be excited about what you're doing, or at least learn to like what you're doing. I think those would be just the general, words of wisdom that I would give at this point.
Thank you so much, Nate. Anything to add there?
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer just because everybody has a different standard of what work-life balance is, right? So I think it's really tough, but I would totally agree with what Spencer said about if you can find a good group to work with who really does value not burning people out, that is huge. I've been at this company for 7 years now, and I'm in a great group, and this company in particular, they really do put a big emphasis on not, people who are energized and rested and ready to work are going to be the best people to work, right? They're going to be getting the most done and the most useful things done. We just heard that on a company call this morning. So, it's hard. And individual groups, even if the company is saying, yes, take care of yourself, there's still going to be groups that are getting run into the ground. So it's hard. It's totally, I think there are pockets of good work-life balance and pockets of not good work-life balance, no matter where you are. But if you find it where you are in a good zone, where you have flexibility to take care of life outside of work, then, that's ideal. Depending on the group that you're in, you can get that in industry or you cannot. So, I don't think that there's a universal answer to that question, unfortunately.
Thanks, Nate. Sandra, anything work-life balance?
So much that I'm not sure we can cover in 3 minutes. That's been perhaps the most challenging question of all. To say as well, I'm really shocked to see that there's even more meetings in industry than in academia, because I feel I'm all day at meetings too. So I was surprised by that. I mean, it's also challenging to achieve work-life balance, because when you become a PI, you also have to juggle in between so many different projects, especially during grant submission. More recently, my husband's birthday was pushed to February 6th, which is the day after NIH deadline. So you can imagine it's really challenging. And something that I was particularly keen on touching on, it's because as also female scientists, when you reach that time when you want to start thinking about a family, it really puts an extra pressure on females it's tough to navigate, especially when you want to make the transition towards having your own family. But just to say that it's all possible. I have a beautiful daughter. It was very inspiring to see very strong female scientists showing that you can do both, because that can be something that it may be in some people's mind, and showing that it's possible to do both. I think it is critical too. I'll stop there. Emily, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely on board with everything you said, Sandra, for role models too. Like, I wish I would have seen more powerful women and seeing the work-life balance. Thankfully, I actually had a really horrible work-life balance in regards to what some people would view as horrible. I was a workaholic. Actually, I still am. But as a postdoc, I loved 80-hour work weeks. I could totally do it. I lived nearby the lab, so I had plenty of overnights in the lab. But coming here, the work-life balance was a little bit more flexible, and I get to do kind of what I want when I want. The students don't think I ever leave my office or the classroom, for that matter, so they'll email me constantly. But I would also say that as far as like I got a puppy dog, so that was my kind of, I have to go home and get out. But it's also just kind of rolling with what your own extremes are and what that is expectation wise from the departments. I know that nobody is going to be having the same work-life balance even within the department. So just kind of seeing how you fit and whether or not, that model is sustainable is kind of key.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Well, it is 3 o'clock, which is our limit. But thank you all. This was a lot of great advice. And I don't know if I can speak for all the panelists, but I'm imagining that most of you all given the advice today would be open to getting some emails about any further follow-up questions. And so thank you so much for the panelists for taking the time to be here, and for everyone in attendance. I just posted the link again if you're interested in the IBANGS annual meeting. And with that, I will close this out. Thank you all so much.
And
Thank you so much.
everybody has an email from me. I'm Paul Meyer. And so like if you need to want to get in contact with anyone that was speaking today, you know where to find me. And thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks,
Bye, everybody.
everyone.